Welcome to the Farmers Branch Chamber Chat. We're here today with Terrell Tipton of Insperity. Thanks for joining us, Terrell. How are you today?
I'm doing wonderful. It's great to be here this morning, Grace.
Awesome. So why don't you go ahead and tell our audience a little about what you do
Sure.
and your specialty specifically in the HR area.
Sure. So I work for a company, Insperity, and Insperity is one of those wonderful Fortune 500 companies that very few people have ever heard of because we don't advertise as much except in really specific places. But really the desire of the company is to have people like me, I'm a business performance advisor, to talk to local businesses about what they're doing around their people, around HR, around everything to help small businesses run better, grow faster, and make more money. So
Awesome.
yeah, we've been around for 34 years, and we are their premier service provider in the outsourced HR space. So just for companies, think of anything that they need to do from an HR perspective, and we help those companies with that, from 2 employees all the way up to 3,002 employees and everything in between.
Wow. I didn't realize you guys were a Fortune 500.
Yeah, well, no, maybe I misspoke on that. I know that we're a S&P 500 traded company.
Okay.
I don't know where we are in the Fortune rankings. So
Okay.
Let me rephrase that.
Awesome. And today's topic is how poor leadership costs you money.
Absolutely.
I feel like that's one of those things people are probably like, well, duh, that makes sense. But I'm sure you have some specifics and some tips to help overcome those barriers.
Definitely. And my career has been really interesting. I started right out of college at the home office of a multinational life insurance company. So I got to see the perspective of a large corporate structured environment. And then from there, I went into the sales force for a little bit. And then I left there and I ran a small business for somebody for 7 years. And I was the de facto HR person. You know, I was the upper level of management right before you got to our boss. And then I opened up my own marketing shop for a little while, and I had to manage people there. And so I feel like I've had a really good perspective of leadership from my own perspective, but then also seeing how other people do it. And I've had such a varied experience when it comes to leadership and employee engagement, but I didn't even know what it was. I had heard the term employee engagement, and I thought it was just kind of, if you'll forgive me, like a frou-frou buzzword that didn't really mean anything, until I really started digging into it and really kind of started digging into what it affects in the long term.
I think you really hit the nail on the head there. Employee engagement does sound like a buzzword or, can be a little frou-frou. But, when you look at companies like Google that have, really made a name for themselves and the things that they do to serve employees and to have nap pods or things like that. Not every company can do that, but there are key ways that you can better serve, your employees without it having to cost a ton of extra money, but giving them value that's beyond just a paycheck.
Absolutely. And if you look at the total scope of things, Gallup does a poll at least a couple of years on employee engagement. And what they found in the most recent survey was that about a third of all employees are actively engaged in the company that they work for. They're excited to do their work. They're willing to give extra, do what they need to do to make that company succeed. On the other side, you have about 13% that are actively disengaged. I mean, and when I say these numbers, I can think to the people that I've worked with and worked for, and I know a lot of business owners can as well. You know who those actively disengaged people are. They're not quite going so far as to sabotage the company, but you know that they're actively looking to leave for whatever reason. And then you have that middle group, it's about 53%, that's not actively disengaged, but they're disengaged from work. So they're going to come in and they're going to give the minimum effort to do their job. And they may not be necessarily looking for something different, but if something good comes along, if they get that email on LinkedIn or whatever, they're going to take a look at that opportunity and go from there. So, and when you break down that 53%, I have some numbers. In general, those 53% just, you know what, let me back up. When you look at an employee, and if you look at things from more of an economic standpoint, if you think of the total output that any employee is capable of doing, you have their minimum job requirements, because if they don't do that, they're gone, But then that one other piece is discretionary effort. How much they're willing to go above and beyond what's required of them. I read a post on LinkedIn last week, and he said it was a group of salaried employees, probably about 20, and their boss, who was in another state, would call them at 8 o'clock every morning and make sure everybody was there. But you better believe at 5 o'clock, when that 5 o'clock number hit, they left. They felt like that micromanagement was really disincentivizing and demotivating them. And so they didn't want to give that extra effort that was there. So,
and to the tune of that, I feel like that's been a real struggle with a lot of, business owners, managers since, going into the remote world. Mm-hmm. So many people have expressed, wow, I have more meetings than ever before, because I think a lot of managers didn't know how to manage it. So the pendulum did swing a little bit into micromanagement, which is frustrating. I mean, if you were in the office, you weren't glued to your computer for 8 hours a day. But, somehow now you're working remotely and you're almost expected. I heard about a company that, they literally have their camera on the entire time so that they know if that person's at their desk working. And if they get up to even go to the bathroom, they have to post a note in their thing. And it's just okay, there's got to be, some trusting and loosening of the reins. And then, what we're hearing now several months in is some companies are wow, our employees are really productive. This is working. So it seems to be, I feel like I'm hearing both ends of the spectrum of, wow, this is great. This is working for those who are probably the actively engaged.
Right.
But then, I think just managers haven't learned how to navigate that space of how do I trust and empower my employees that, hey, they may not be chained to their desk for the 8 hours, but okay, what are the outcomes that we need to get accomplished, and are those getting accomplished?
Absolutely. And there's a big difference between management and leadership. And of course, managers have to be able to lead. You don't want to drive somebody with a whip. I tried that for a little while when I was a manager, and it was very short-lived because it didn't work well. But empowering the people that work for you and showing them that you trust them and that you believe that they have a desire to do what they're supposed to do is kind of one of the basic building blocks of employee engagement. But let's kind of wrap around to what you were talking about with companies monitor how people are spending their time, because that's a big deal. The salary.com did a time wasting survey at work a few years ago. And about 30% of employees will waste about 30 minutes a day.
That's it?
Yeah, it's not bad.
Okay.
Another 30% are going to waste up to an hour. You got about 16% that waste up to 2 hours a day. And then there's another 10% that will waste anywhere from 3 to 5 hours a day.
Wow.
That's crazy. And you know what? I'll be honest, there have been some times in my career that I was actively disengaged where I was. And I did waste a lot of time, But they dug into that survey a little more. And about half of the people surveyed said, yes, the time that they spend not doing work is because they need breaks and because it makes them kind of reset and get remotivated to keep going. And that totally makes sense. But it kind of leans into that disengagement to whether somebody's just not connected to their job, or, there's a whole bunch of reasons that people feel like it's okay for them to waste the company's time. There's a big difference in between just needing a moment versus I really don't want to do what I'm supposed to do, or I really don't want to be here, or I'm just kind of punching the clock until I can go. Mm-hmm. And it really, the idea of employee engagement is designed to dig into that, because that can have some real monetary effects on a company.
Yeah.
I think when you and I talked about doing this, one of the things that I said is there are real financial impacts to these things. And employee engagement and time wasting is one of those. So think about this.
Because HR and payroll is generally most companies' biggest expense after,
absolutely,
maybe their land and assets.
Right. So if you're paying, let's say that you have 10 people in your company, okay, and you're paying all of them 8 hours a day. What would it look like if, however, you could get 15 minutes of work back for each person? Okay, so you have your 3 that waste 30 minutes a day. You have 3 that spend an hour a day doing something else. You have maybe two that are doing 2 hours worth, and then the rest, 3 to 5 hours. If you could just get 15 minutes a day back from those people being engaged and wanting to do their job, that's a 3% increase in productivity. So putting that in real numbers, if it's a $3 million revenue company, it's a $94,000 impact on their bottom line. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah.
I don't know any business, well, no, let me rephrase that. There aren't a lot of businesses whose margins are broad enough that they wouldn't want 94,000 extra dollars on a $3 million revenue.
Makes sense.
So,
and I would almost be curious, maybe they broke this down, or maybe this is beyond, but as what points in the day are they finding that they're wasting the most time? Morning,
sure.
Afternoon. One of the concepts I really like about Europe, especially Spain, is they have this concept of siesta, in which they take those 2 hours. And, as somebody who generally works 6 days a week, often 50, 60 hours, sometimes there are just those days where I need a good hour and a half of a power nap, a good lunch to really rest and recharge. But then I'll be going until 9 or 10 p.m. handling emails, reports, things like that. But I have, right, I think we've all personally experienced those days where you just need a nap and a snack.
Absolutely.
And it does give you, and then you're like, well, I'm not necessarily waiting for 5 o'clock to come. Then I'm like, okay, I know that I took this period to recharge, and now I'm going to work a little bit later to make up for it. But, so again, just that curiosity is if they find that there's times of day that are, where people are wasting more time, and, maybe they're actively engaged for the first 4 hours of the day and the coffee wears off, or they have pasta for lunch and they just need a nap.
Right. Well, it's, a lot of employees will kind of take that first hour of the day to really get moving, and then they'll take that extra, say 30 minutes after lunch to kind of reset and move forward. So I know that those would be higher times. But I really think kind of what your point earlier was, is through this work from home situation that we've been forced to be in, we're able to understand more the way that we work as individuals. And then if you have a manager that supports that and says, hey, you know what, these are the things that we need to get done. If you want to work from 9 to noon, and then from 2 to 6, and then a little bit later, as long as everything's getting done, it's your schedule. As long as the communication happens the way it needs to, there shouldn't be a problem with that.
Yeah. And then that's, to the tune of a lot of what I'm hearing, especially for the people who are working from home and homeschooling kids, some managers are being very gracious and understanding and saying, hey, we know that you're also helping your child get through school. So yeah, their workday may look more like, sprinkled between 9 and 8 p.m. I hear some people are working later into the evening, but again, they're like, well, then the kids they give them dinner, they put a movie on, they go to bed, that kind of thing. And they're actually able to do their job better,
right.
By having that flexibility. I think that's been, again, a huge learning curve for a lot of companies, managers, employees, figuring out what does work best.
Well, and there hasn't been a lot of data that's come out about kind of employee engagement, work from home amid the stay-at-home orders and the social distancing and everything having to do with the pandemic. But there was one really early in March, and it was talking about companies that had a really good plan, had really good communication, and then took everything into consideration of what was going on. And the engagement at those companies by their employees was even higher than it usually is, because they felt like the company saw them as individuals, even though it was all of them as individuals, and just said, hey, your situation may be different, but here's what we're going to do. If you have something going on, if you have needs, let your manager know. And then, as long as the job duties are being performed, you're okay. So it's really amazing what those companies were able to do.
Yeah. And I think, right, when we think it in just bigger terms, it's like labor unions and things spent years and decades trying to get us a nice 8 to 5, 9 to 6 work schedule.
Yeah.
And then this pandemic just obliterated all that away.
Absolutely.
And in some sense, we do have less boundaries because, it is invading our home life. But in some sense, you're able to do laundry. And so, right, this has just kind of almost become the Wild West of how workflow works.
Right.
But, again, it's great for those who have the strategic plans, the technology in place. And again, especially the communication systems so that, again, there's that balance of, yes, a manager wants to know what's going on and that the outcomes and the productivity is there, but also empowering people to do it when they're at their best.
Yeah, absolutely. And empowerment is a big part of employee engagement. There's a recent Gallup poll about recognition and engagement and showed some really interesting highlights. So a manager that focuses on somebody's strengths, if that's what they're working to do, is say, this is what you're really good at. Let's figure out ways that we can use what you're really good at in what you do. So the likelihood of that person's disengagement drops to 1%. It's virtually nothing. Where on the other hand, if a manager focuses on somebody's weaknesses, the likelihood of disengagement goes up to more than 20%. So there's a big discrepancy there. And then even worse, when a manager ignores somebody, the likelihood of disengagement rises to 40%. And I've had that situation before. I think we all had that where we don't feel like either our questions aren't being answered or we're not finding the help that we receive. It's the difference between a short term, oh my gosh, my days have been busy for the last 3 days because I've had this and that and the other, versus just completely being ignored as an employee. And that can, you're begging for a turnover at that point.
Yeah, I feel like it should be common knowledge that, a person who's valued and appreciated will do, 1,000 times more and will be a better employee, will be a better representative of your company than one that's not. But at the same time, how many people are actively doing that?
Right.
Is the question. And then the other thought to the tune of that is like, are we doing it in that person's, I think most people are familiar with the 5 love languages.
Sure.
If that person really receives appreciation through gift cards, then they need gift cards. But maybe another person really just wants the public appraise or not appraise, public praise and approval.
Right.
And so, but if someone doesn't like having that kind of praise happening for them, then you're not even going to really reach them with your gratitude because it doesn't necessarily shouldn't be the way that you want to show gratitude and appreciation. And the question is really digging in and understanding how your employees feel valued and gratitude and appreciation.
Right. And that kind of was going to take me into my points of what a leader can do if they understand, where their company is. The first thing, you have to understand where things are, and then you have to have a path to move forward, but it has to come from the top. The leader has to be actively engaged in wanting to improve the culture of their company, improve the employee engagement of their company. And it's what I was talking to somebody about is the leader has to let it show, and then they have to let it flow down to the rest of their company. It has to be very, very top driven. The difficult part of that is finding out what your employees want. There was a company that I worked for that was talking about doing employee surveys, but they wanted them done internally, which we ended up having the conversation of nobody would answer honestly on that, because you would know who was talking about what and what the specific issues were, to how it would be so much better for the company and also for the employees to find somebody outside that does company surveys, that they will, take all that information and then aggregate it so that if there are some consistent things that come out, okay, that's an issue that need to be addressed. If there are things that were just departmental issues, you can look at it that way, but you won't have the president of the company hearing that there's one person who's really disengaged because of something that happened, and to have some sort of retaliation, because you don't ever want an employee to have that fear.
Yeah, I feel like, again, common sense but how many people are actually doing, the things that we really know are best practices within an
Right.
organization.
Right. And that's the kind of companies that I look for that are good companies for Insperity. Is it's a leader, it's the owner, the CEO of whatever that has a getting better mentality. He knows that, I mean, no business owner can know everything. That's why they hire great people around them in IT, HR, whatever. But they say, okay, you know what? I see that this is something that we could potentially improve in. Let's figure out how to do that. And you're always going to have on the flip side the other companies that, this is the way that we've always done it. This is what we are. This is how it is.
Yeah, and it's definitely unfortunate when there's that, I don't want to necessarily call it pride, but I
Right.
feel like it sometimes is rooted in that of,
Yeah.
well, I know best. Well, the collective corporate high level, we know best, and they're not
Mhm.
willing to, humble themselves and be open to the hard feedback, to the hard conversations,
Sure.
to investing in something that they've never done before
Mhm.
for that chance. And right, I feel like all business people know that there's risk involved with
Oh,
business,
sure.
but understanding that needs to apply to investing in new streams and risking having these tough conversations in order for that opportunity. You can't get better if you don't know how.
Right. Well, and I'm going to actually say that's probably a bigger financial risk to the company to not do something like this. Let's think about turnover. Okay, when a company loses an employee, you have two things. You have things that are really noticeable from a bottom line standpoint, the direct costs, and then the indirect costs of that. And you break into those direct costs, and you have the costs of paying out that person's PTO, and then if you use a recruiter, what those recruiting fees are going to be, direct hire fees, job placement fees, all those things. That's something that a business leader can see what those numbers are. But then you look at those soft costs of what that's going to do to morale. When you bring that new person in, do you want them trained by your second to last best person, or do you want them trained by one of your best people? Well, that takes that person away from doing their work, and so there's going to be a loss in productivity there. There's so many different things, and they found that even for, say, a $60,000 a year job, the cost of replacing that is almost twice that.
Really?
Yes, between all those different things, and if you have that continuous turnover, that's why one of the things that I look for in a company that I want to work with is a company that's having turnover issues but can't figure out why. Because those turnover issues, they're like trying to mow the lawn, but every fourth step your lawnmower stops, and then you have to start it again, and then you can just never get on that consistent upward mobility that your company needs.
Yeah, it does. It takes time to train and
Yeah.
to invest in a person. And it is, again, one of our greatest assets, but it can also be one of your greatest liabilities
Mhm.
if not, managed and done properly.
Absolutely. And then the flip side of that, if a company works really hard, but you know what, honestly, I've found that it's not even a company working really hard, it's making an effort. And even if you go from 0 to 10 on the scale, for employees that have had 0, going just to 10 or 20 shows that leadership cares about them. And now if you have a company that's like at a 50 on employee engagement, I'm sure there's law of diminishing returns going to a 60, but you want to take care of your people the best you can. In doing so, there was an a SHRM winter report that came out a couple of years ago that companies with employee recognition systems, now, and those need to be kind of, take a step back. An employee recognition system doesn't have to be the same across the organization. I always remember in all the companies that I worked at, the feeling that sales is different than everybody else. And it's true. Because salespeople are often, if you take the stereotypes into consideration, they're motivated by money, they're motivated by competition, they're motivated by all those things. It's perfectly fine for a company to do a separate recognition system for the sales staff, and then based on different departments, based on their own individual goals. It doesn't have to be, we're going to pick one out of our 40 employees every month and recognize that person. It can be smaller things departmentally.
Mhm.
But a good employee recognition system has shown a 63% increase in employee productivity,
Wow.
a 58% return on profit margins, a 52% increase in customer retention, and a 51% increase in employee retention. So, I mean, that's cutting costs on the employee side. That's raising top line revenue on productivity and customer retention and all those things. It really makes sense for a company's financials to really dig into this. And we know right now there are a lot of businesses in a whole bunch of different places based on what's happened to them in the past 7 months of the pandemic. And each one of them, I'm sure, would want to be able to stabilize their company both from an employee standpoint and from a financial standpoint. And looking more into employee engagement is a great way to do that.
This has been awesome. I don't think, again, there's enough conversations, or maybe it is and just doesn't ping my radar, but about, what again, I think that we get conceptually that there's financial impacts to turnover, but I don't know that we get the financial impacts to a good recognition system and the increases in productivity, and that it does need to be, within the entire organization. Coming from a sales background myself, I mean, right, we love that we can win trips or do this and do that. And I imagine, it almost having only one department that gets extra perks and benefits can probably in some kind of way negatively impact the rest of the organization if they don't, because they're like, well, great, the sales guys sold all the computers, but I'm the one troubleshooting all the customer problems, or we're the ones building the new equipment, or this, that, and the other. And, not that it's an overt resentment or jealousy or whatever that might be, but kind of recognizing they're like, oh, well, those guys get all the credit and all the cool stuff, and the rest of us are just, here to
support them.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And they wouldn't be what they are without the rest of the organization, from the admin person, the receptionist, the IT guy, the this, the that. So understanding how those all really, integrate together is important.
I think, taking March of this year and earlier, we had the concept of if our office space had an upbeat tempo to it. That was our culture. That was how we gauge the temperature of our employees. But I think that we've really been able to see that it's more about how employees interact with each other, how they interact with management and leadership, and how all those things are interdependent on each other. And I think that leaders could sit back and say, okay, yes, the sales get their commissions, they get their incentives, but we need to reward people as well for the things that they do for all those people that are putting gas in the tank.
Exactly. We've got a fun comment here from Alex. He said it's a win-win for small to mid-sized companies without an HR or payroll. Insperity makes sense. And
Alex is fantastic. I really appreciate him and everything that he's done for the Farmers Branch Chamber, and just being a great sounding board for me as well. I'm so happy that he's one of the volunteers for the ambassadors. He's board chair.
He's on the board member. Yep.
Sorry about that, Alex.
Alex, and I think, he can speak to this topic because this is what he does as part of his role. Yes, he's community liaison for, Sam Pack, Ford, and Chevrolet, but he is also there on the employee engagement side.
Right.
And I know he's been working to implement some new things, be it, just a cool tumbler that says, thanks for being here for 20 years of service. Sometimes people just really it doesn't always have to be a huge bonus or a huge paycheck increase. Just being recognized, goes a long way.
Yeah, it's the little things time over time that make a bigger impact than one thing every once in a while.
Awesome. So we're pretty much, ready to bring this thing to a close. Any last comments on leadership tips, a word of encouragement you can give to people who are having a rough go at 2020?
Yeah, so 2020 has been an interesting year for a lot of people. And I think one of the concerns that we have is we don't know we know how it's going to end. I mean, there will be a pandemic and people will get sick. But at the end of the day, we're going to end up in a place where business is more back to normal and life is more back to normal, because the focus shouldn't just be on business. We're all doing the best that we can with what we have right now. And some days for some people, it's not very much, and that's okay. As long as they're working on those days where they do have a lot to give a lot. But the biggest thing that I would offer as a piece of advice, if I can, is to connect to other people. I think this pandemic has shown us more than anything else, and believe it or not, I'm an introvert, but we still need connection with people, because I know that I can sit behind my computer for 4 straight hours working from the house if I don't have any meetings or calls, that I'm working on LinkedIn or email or putting together a proposal from somebody, and I come out of that and I realize that I haven't talked to anybody. And that we need to connect with other people, if nothing else, just to check in. Like the first thing I said to you this morning is, how are you doing? Because I don't think that we're sharing that with each other enough.
Yeah. And I think what I appreciate about you is, you're somebody who asks, when you ask, how are you doing? You really want an answer. You really listen for an answer and are willing to dig in. And I think, we've gotten a how are you is just kind of a passing greeting, but not everybody's really wanting to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And, taking a few minutes to pick up the phone and call a friend if you are, on work from home, mandates from your company. But, there's somebody out there who may not be doing well. And, your 5 or 10 minute phone call to say, hey, and genuinely ask, how are you, can go a long way just for that person, right? This is outside of business. This is outside of HR, this and that, but we do need that human element continued both through the business side of management and leadership, but even just with our friends and family, more than a text, more than a Zoom, more than I liked your stuff on Facebook or LinkedIn,
right.
But taking those 5-10 minutes, a couple days a week will go a long way just for, I think, your own well-being, but also, and you never know how you might positively impact someone else.
Human beings are social creatures, and we, for some people like me, I joke it's less than others, but we need to kind of just connect with each other on a fairly frequent basis.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's a wrap for today.
I enjoyed it so much, Grace.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you to our Chamber audience. We're here to bring content that's valuable for you, so please submit any feedback, comments. If you'd like to be featured on Chamber Chat, please reach out to us via email, the website, Facebook, LinkedIn, and we look forward to coming with you soon. Oh, and remember, get out there and go vote.